What if the reason you feel tired, lost, restless, behind, and strangely disconnected from your own life is not because you are failing? What if it's because you were taught to win the wrong game? Think about it. From the time you were young, you were given a map. Work hard, be liked, be impressive, be productive, be attractive, be normal, be successful, stay busy. Get ahead, don't fall behind, make something of yourself. And if you did all of that correctly, you were supposed to feel fulfilled, supposed to feel alive, supposed to feel certain, supposed to feel like your life actually belonged to you. But for a lot of people, something terrifying happens. They do everything right and still feel wrong, still anxious, still empty, still haunted by the feeling that something essential is missing, still secretly wondering, why does my life look acceptable on the outside, but feel dead on the inside? That question matters, because maybe your exhaustion is not from life itself. Maybe it's from performing a version of life that was never designed for your soul. Carl Jung believed that much of human suffering comes from living too far away from the self, the deeper center of who you really are beneath conditioning, performance, adaptation, and fear. And that is exactly what modern life trains people to do. It teaches you to build a polished identity while abandoning the deeper truth underneath it. So you become efficient, but not whole, socially functional, but inwardly divided, successful on paper, but psychologically homeless. And eventually, if you live like that long enough, life starts to feel like a game you can never truly win. Because no matter how much you achieve, the hunger remains. No matter how much approval you get, the insecurity returns. No matter how busy you stay, the silence catches up. So in this video, we're going to talk about the uncomfortable possibility that you have likely been playing the game of life wrong. Not because you're foolish, but because the rules you were handed may have been designed for survival, not meaning, for conformity, not wholeness, for status, not truth. And once you see that, everything changes, because the real tragedy is not losing the game everyone else is playing. The real tragedy is winning it, and realizing too late that it was never worth your life. 1. You were taught to chase approval, not alignment. The first way most people play life wrong is simple. They build their entire life around being accepted. Not aligned, accepted. So they become who the room rewards. At school, they become what gets praised. At work, they become what gets promoted. In relationships, they become what gets chosen. Online, they become what gets attention. Slowly, almost invisibly, a person stops asking, "What is true for me?" and starts asking, "What version of me gets love?" That's where the split begins. Jung called this the persona, the mask we develop to function in society. Now, the persona is not evil. You need some version of it to survive. But the problem begins when the mask becomes your whole life, when the role becomes more developed than the person, when your image becomes more protected than your soul, when being admired matters more than being real. Then you start winning socially, while losing inwardly. This is why some people are deeply liked and deeply unhappy. They have mastered the art of being digestible, but they no longer know who they are when nobody is watching. And if that hits something in you, it's because many people were never taught to live from alignment. They were taught to live from applause. But approval is a terrible compass. It will lead you into jobs that impress people, but kill your spirit. Relationships that look right but feel wrong. Friendships built on performance. Lifestyles designed to be envied rather than inhabited. And the worst part? You can spend years calling this maturity, when in reality it is self-abandonment with a clean haircut. If you've been playing life for approval, then no wonder you feel tired, because a life built around being accepted by others will eventually estrange you from yourself. And when that happens, even success starts to feel like a costume. 2. You confused productivity with purpose. This one traps almost everyone. You wake up, you do things, you answer messages, you meet deadlines, you make progress, you stay moving, and because you are active, you assume you are living. But movement is not meaning. Busyness is not purpose. A lot of people are not alive in any deep sense. They are merely occupied, and that occupation can become addictive. Why? Because stillness is dangerous to a person who has built their identity around doing. If you stop moving, you might feel the emptiness. If you stop producing, you might hear the grief. If you stop striving, you might finally confront the terrifying question, do I actually want the life I'm working so hard to maintain? That is why productivity is sometimes used as anesthesia, not ambition, anesthesia. Jung understood that the modern person often escapes inward confrontation through outward activity. It looks respectable, it even gets rewarded, but underneath the endless motion is often avoidance. Avoidance of silence, avoidance of uncertainty, avoidance of the unlived life, avoidance of the soul demanding a different direction. This is why you can be incredibly productive and still feel deeply lost. Because the deeper question is not, am I doing enough? It is, am I building something that actually belongs to me? That question destroys illusions, because sometimes you are not tired from working hard, you are tired from working hard in the wrong direction, and no amount of discipline can fix a life built around the wrong center. 3. You thought comfort was peace. This is one of the most dangerous mistakes in life. People think if something feels familiar, it must be right. If it doesn't challenge them too much, it must be safe. If it doesn't disrupt their routine, it must be peace. But comfort and peace are not the same thing. Comfort often keeps you asleep. Peace makes you honest. Comfort says, stay who you've always been. Peace says, outgrow what no longer fits. Comfort avoids disturbance. Peace can require it. A lot of people stay in dead relationships because they are comfortable, stay in draining jobs because they are comfortable, stay in old identities because they are comfortable, stay in shallow routines because they are comfortable, and they tell themselves it's stability. But sometimes what you call stability is just fear that has decorated the room. Jung's entire philosophy points toward this brutal truth. Transformation is not comfortable. To become who you really are, something false has to die. A role, a fantasy, a dependency, a social mask, a way of being loved, a version of yourself built for survival, not truth. And most people would rather remain trapped in the familiar than endure the death required for real growth. So they choose comfort. And then wonder why they feel spiritually numb. Because they are not at peace. They are unchallenged in all the wrong ways. The game of life is not won by maximizing comfort. It is won by becoming more real. And reality often asks more of you than comfort ever will. 4. You made the outer world your measure of worth. Here is where life becomes a rigged game. The more you base your worth on the outside world, the more power you hand away. Now your peace depends on responses, on money, on attention, on ranking, on comparison, on being chosen, on being visible, on being ahead. That is slavery in elegant clothing. Because if your identity depends on external confirmation, you will never have stable selfhood. You will keep borrowing yourself from other people's reactions. Praise lifts you too high. Criticism destroys you too easily. Rejection becomes proof of inadequacy. Someone else's success feels like your failure. Silence feels like disappearance. That is what happens when the world becomes your mirror. Jung warned that what is unconscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And one of the most unconscious patterns people live inside is this: I am only valuable if the world reflects me back in the right way. That belief can run an entire life. It can make you perform constantly, prove constantly, compare constantly, panic constantly. And underneath it all is a person who has not yet learned how to stand in themselves without an audience. That is why so many people are mentally collapsing in the age of constant exposure. They have outsourced their identity. But life begins to change when you stop asking the world to tell you who you are, because the world is inconsistent, immature, distracted, projection-filled, often blind. You cannot build a stable self on unstable mirrors, and until you learn that, you will keep playing a game you cannot win, because the rules keep changing, the audience keeps changing, the standards keep changing, and all the while your real life is passing by. 5. You are trying to eliminate pain instead of learning from it. Most people think the goal of life is to avoid pain, avoid rejection, avoid uncertainty, avoid failure, avoid grief, avoid discomfort, avoid loneliness, avoid humiliation. So they build their whole strategy around self-protection. But a life built only around avoiding pain becomes small, rigid and shallow. Because pain is not only something that harms you. Sometimes pain is information. Sometimes pain is initiation. Sometimes pain is the only thing strong enough to break the false self. Jung would say that the wounded parts of us are not just unfortunate leftovers. They are doorways. They reveal what we fear, what we deny, what we depend on, what we still have not integrated. But if your only goal is to avoid pain, you never read the message. You just keep running. So you avoid the hard conversation, avoid the honest risk, avoid the leap, avoid the ending, avoid the solitude, avoid the truth, and then you call it protecting your peace. But often it's just fear becoming lifestyle. The irony is this: the more you try to avoid pain entirely, the more fragile you become, and the more fragile you become, the smaller your life gets. Then one day, you realize you have not built a life. You have built a fortress. Safe, maybe, but dead. The game of life is not about removing all pain. It is about becoming someone who can pass through pain without being reduced to it. That is a completely different kind of strength. 6. You were living by default, not by consciousness. This may be the deepest mistake of all. A lot of people do not consciously choose their lives. They inherit them. They inherit beliefs, standards, ambitions, fears, definitions of success, relationship models, emotional habits, religious assumptions, social roles. And because those things arrive early, they feel like truth. But much of what you call my life may simply be conditioning that never got questioned. That is terrifying, because you can spend decades obeying scripts you never consciously chose. Jung's work was, in many ways, a rebellion against unconscious living. He believed that becoming whole required confronting the hidden material inside you, the shadow, the unlived self, the buried desire, the denied fear, the role that no longer fits. But most people never do this. They just continue the pattern, continue the relationship dynamic, continue the career path, continue the family wound, continue the social performance, and they call it life. But repetition is not destiny. It is often unconsciousness. So if life feels strangely repetitive, emotionally stale, or spiritually flat, ask yourself, am I actually choosing this, or merely repeating what became familiar? That question can shatter the trance. Because many people are not living intentionally, they are living automatically, and the price of an unconscious life is enormous. You may gain approval, you may gain structure, you may even gain success, but you lose aliveness. And once aliveness goes, everything else starts to feel haunted. 7. You thought winning meant becoming more impressive, not more whole. This is the final twist. Most people think the goal is to become more impressive, smarter, richer, more admired, more respected, more attractive, more accomplished, more untouchable. But Jung would argue that the real task of life is not inflation, it is integration, not becoming a bigger image, becoming a more whole human being. That means integrating your shadow instead of pretending you are pure, integrating your weakness instead of hiding behind performance, integrating your pain instead of making your life a distraction from it, integrating the rejected parts of yourself until you stop needing constant validation to feel real. That is true development. And it looks very different from what the world celebrates. Sometimes it looks like slowing down. Sometimes it looks like leaving what impresses others. Sometimes it looks like disappointing people. Sometimes it looks like grief. Sometimes it looks like being misunderstood while you become more honest. Wholeness is not always glamorous, but it is alive. And a whole person is far more powerful than an impressive one. Because an impressive person can still be ruled by fear, ego, envy, insecurity, and image. A whole person has made contact with themselves. They are harder to manipulate, harder to seduce with empty status, harder to control with shame, harder to distract from what matters. That is what real winning looks like. Not the perfect persona, the integrated self. So maybe you have been playing the game of life wrong, but not because you're lazy, not because you're weak, not because you're incapable. Maybe you were simply handed a game built around appearance instead of essence, a game where the prize was admiration, not meaning, a game where the scoreboard measured status, not depth, a game where the right life often required betraying your own soul in socially approved ways. And if that's true, then your confusion makes sense. Your emptiness makes sense. Your exhaustion makes sense. Your strange feeling that something is off, even when life looks fine, makes sense. Because the deeper self cannot be satisfied by substitutes forever. It will keep sending signals: restlessness, numbness, discontent, envy, depression, aching boredom, the sense that you're living beside your life rather than inside it. These are not always signs that something is wrong with you. Sometimes they are signs that something false is no longer working. And that may be the beginning of awakening. So if you've been feeling behind, maybe you're not behind. Maybe you're just no longer willing to keep running toward things that don't matter. If you've been feeling disconnected, maybe you're not broken. Maybe the false life is finally losing its grip. If you've been questioning everything, maybe that's not failure. Maybe that is the first honest moment you've had in years. Because the real game of life is not about collecting symbols of worth. It is not about becoming impossible to criticize. Not about outrunning pain. Not about being admired by people who don't know you. Not about building a life that photographs well but feels empty to inhabit. The real game is deeper. It is to become conscious, to reclaim your life from conditioning, to stop performing a self that no longer fits, to face what you avoid, to integrate what you deny, to build a life that may look simpler from the outside but feels truer on the inside. That is a different kind of victory. Quiet, unfashionable, difficult, but real. And maybe that is why so many people feel lost right now, because they are still trying to win a game designed by fear, comparison, and performance. But you do not have to keep playing by those rules. You can step out. You can ask harder questions. You can disappoint the wrong audience. You can stop worshipping appearances. You can let the old version of you die. You can choose meaning over image, wholeness over applause, truth over convenience. And yes, it may cost you. It may cost you approval, certainty, comfort, even some relationships built on the old you. But it will give you something far more valuable, a life that finally feels like yours. And once that happens, something strange begins. You stop chasing everything. You stop proving all the time. You stop fearing silence so much. You stop confusing performance with identity. You stop asking, "How do I win?" and start asking the better question, "How do I live in a way that does not betray my soul?" That is the real game, and very few people ever learn how to play it. Comment below, "I'm done playing the wrong game." Subscribe for more Carl Jung-style psychology, shadow work, human nature, self-mastery, deep self-awareness, and inner transformation.